First Person Advisors is now a subsidiary of NFP, the fifth largest insurance broker in the world, combining local expertise with access to global capabilities and solutions. Learn more at firstpersonadvisors.com.
I've been an automobile enthusiast and a vintage racer. It comes from my love of driving. I've always, since 12, 14 years old and was able to reach the pedals, have just loved the joy of driving.
For Indianapolis businessman Turner Woodard, the key word is joy, whether it's his love affair with the automobile or his passion for painting.
The joy and the spontaneity to it. The action, the nothing being quite definitive. You see something at one glance and you can turn around at another glance, you might see something different.
You may not think driving old cars and painting abstract art go hand in hand, but they're a perfect match in Turner Woodard's world. It gives insight into what makes him tick, what drives him to buy, renovate, and bring new life to vintage Indiana landmarks. Get to know Indianapolis entrepreneur Turner Woodard, why and how he does it his way on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast. Hello and welcome to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. I'm Gary Dick. Turner Woodard made his first big splash in central Indiana real estate in the early 90s when he bought the historic Stutz Automobile Factory on the near north side of downtown Indy. He turned it into something unheard of back then, a small business incubator, one of the first in the country. After that, he purchased and renovated another historic building, the Canterbury Hotel in downtown Indy. He has since sold both properties and is now focused on breathing new life into the Horton Fan Factory in Carmel, among other properties. His approach to real estate: buy it, light it, clean it, paint it, and lease it. Ultimately, it will be a pretty cool place. And I'm pleased to be joined by a pretty cool guy, Turner Woodard, on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast. Turner, how are you?
I'm fine, Gary. I'm fine. And thank you for the opportunity, and always nice to visit with you.
Yeah, likewise. So, I was thinking about how to get into our conversation here. And, you are an entrepreneur, you're an investor, a car collector, motorsports nut, an artist. How would you, if you had a word to describe Turner Woodard, what would it be?
Oh my gosh, Gary, that's putting me on the spot.
Yeah. I mean, you're into so many things. And I think you've always struck me as someone who's so passionate about really everything you do.
And that's nice of you to say. And, sometimes, Gary, I just leave those identification or those thoughts to others rather than myself. But I think perhaps, what I enjoy, I just try to bring a spirit to it. I take quite a few traits from my mother, and that was always staying active. Some of the things that, such as the art or the cars, is just a spirit that I have about the joy of, everybody does something.
Yeah.
And those are some of the things that I do.
Yeah. And I think you have a real appreciation for history and heritage, because I think back to your acquisition and what you did with the Stutz near downtown Indy. And when you bought that, when that started, I mean, that was quite an undertaking. I mean, that was a unique project, to say the least. And you really turned it into something not only unique, but very, very special. Talk about that, because that really gets back, obviously, the Stutz to the history and the heritage of the auto industry in Indianapolis.
Well, it does. And, I think you and I have talked about it before, and it's been a wonderful project for many, many reasons. Generally, Gary, it came from just not wanting the building to be torn down and demolished. We were involved, our family was involved with historic landmarks, and Reed Williamson was there at the time. And Reed and I played tennis together for many years, and he made me aware that a demolition permit had been pulled for the Stutz factory. And Turner, would you like to look at it? Can you give me some ideas and thoughts about it? And certainly driven by it for many, many years. And then when he invited me to come inside and look around, the whole thing certainly grew that it absolutely should not come down.
Yeah.
And so from there, we just worked with different groups. And at the end of the day, that group to take it over was my company.
Yeah.
And it was very, very special.
We'll talk for those who aren't familiar with the Stutz, and we're fortunate to have a lot of listeners from around the country, around the globe, really. Give us just a thumbnail description of the Stutz, how the massive nature of that building, what it once was.
Yeah, built and started being built in 1903, finished in 1912. One of many automobile factories that were called Indianapolis home, about 500,000 square feet, a full city block, a city and a half block, and just a wonderful reflection of those times. And as you mentioned, then how do you, adapt it for more modern times? And that was the challenge, but it was a pretty massive undertaking at that point.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that was part of Indianapolis's reputation at the time, before Detroit, right? Wasn't Indianapolis? It was like little Detroit, right? I mean, Indianapolis was the center of the automotive industry.
Gary, it sure was. And, not a lot of people know that, but absolutely. I had a large map of the state of Indiana and the State Museum gave to me after one of their exhibits. And yes, I think there were, 10 or 11 just in the Indianapolis area, maybe like 50 or 60 throughout the state. And, the vibrancy of that business, around the turn of the century was special. Some of the best minds, the best engineers were all in Indianapolis and in Indiana.
Yeah.
The assembly line and the ability to get parts and everything quickly, that's what changed it to Detroit.
Yeah. In that building, I was fortunate to be through it, several times. Just an interesting mix of things in there. Obviously, there were ongoing businesses. It was a great location for businesses to set up shop, be they startups or more mature businesses. But it also reflected your interests as well. And keeping on that car theme, you are an avid car collector. I don't know how to describe your car collection. You really have to see it to appreciate it. Talk about your collection of automobiles, because it's unbelievable.
Yeah, well, thank you, Gary. And yeah, it's been eclectic as a word, and but absolutely, it really my car collecting and people that know me, it came from my love of driving. I just have always enjoyed driving automobiles or trucks or tractors, and our family farm down in Kentucky. I started driving with the workman, 12, 14 years old, and just loved it. And so from there, the freedom, the spirit, the wind in your hair type of thing, that's what led to the car collecting.
Yeah.
And every one of my cars, truly, I think your listeners would enjoy, come from some memory or some relation to my family or to my life. I have a Mustang, that my dad took me to school in.
Uh-huh.
I have a couple other cars that, when I was going to shows and starting my career, these men were influential. And one of them started in Fort Wayne, Indiana, the Ferrari Club of America, that people don't know was started there. And so kind of an ode to these memories.
Yeah, well, talk about, you may have multiple favorites, but do you have a favorite? It's got to be, it's probably like, asking a father to pick a favorite kid, but how, do you have a favorite car?
Oh, Gary, you imagine how many times I do get asked that. It's a wonderful discussion. And you're right with your comment. Ralph Lauren talks about his cars, and just like that is your children. It's hard to pick. And I add to it a little bit that depending on either the mood or the occasion, which one best suits. I have a wonderful 46 Lincoln town car. So we call that our ice cream car. A couple of the sports cars, when it's a beautiful Saturday or Sunday, that goes for another reason. I have a Rolls Royce that I bought to drive my parents, from the church in, and have kept it all those years. So they're all quite special, but, the Stutzes are very special to me, remembering when I could afford to buy some and display them at the factory. So I bought one car a year, Gary, for about 30 years.
Wow.
So there you have it.
Wow. How many cars do you have in your collection?
Oh, gosh, I'm not exactly sure. I know how many I insure. And I know
right.
I don't have to fuss with, somewhere in that 30 or 40 range.
Yeah. It's very, very cool. Art obviously is another passion of yours, and you displayed your art there, but you, as I recall over time in the Stutz, you really opened up the building to artists, right? In the community to display their work.
I did. Again, another nice memory. And, how your listeners might like that, as I took it on as a very unique, sort of daring, at the time, real estate project. And what would happen would, we had about 15,000 square feet per floor. I'd rent out most of the floor, but there might be a corner or a middle ground that would have 900 square feet or 1,200 square feet. And some of the artist friends that I knew, would just love to have that space. And so then I could sell it or rent it to them at a discounted, and then that would fill out the floor. And Gary, that just snowballed. Yeah. And so it worked, it was a win-win situation.
Yeah. And a great way to showcase the artistic community in Indianapolis, central Indiana, which many times, I think the arts and culture community get overlooked in a lot of ways and under, I don't know what the term would be, but underappreciated maybe, because it is really strong. And that gave the opportunity to showcase some of that.
Gary, no doubt about it. And the spirit that the artists and the art community brought to a business center, again, I know you understand, you couldn't really buy that kind of spirit and that kind of enthusiasm. The technology companies that were there, the craftsmen that were there, all benefited from the spirit that this mix of the Stutz family was very special. No doubt about it.
Yeah. And you sold here within the last year or two, you sold the Stutz. Was it just time?
Well, maybe an offer I couldn't refuse.
Yeah.
But yes, Gary, I think that certainly was part of it. We were taken on and a plan to what would the next 50 years of the Stutz look like. That was exactly the plan and the model, and the same sort of thing that happened at the Canterbury. We were looking to renovate and to bring in new technologies. And as that unfolded, we reached out to different partners. And in both of the cases, well, why don't you sell us the factory? Well, it's not for sale. It's
right.
not for sale. But as fate would have it and things unfolded, we thought we found a very special partner in these Samara Road guys. And my family's kept an interest in the factory. And the promise is to appreciate the history and the integrity and what it means to Indianapolis. but bring it into the kind of more modern world.
Yeah. Another property. Yeah. And you mentioned it, the Canterbury Hotel, historic property, boutique hotel in downtown Indianapolis, which you acquired. Talk about that acquisition and that experience of owning Canterbury.
Again, very special. Not exactly sure that, I wanted to be in the hotel business, but then when my family and we looked at it and broke it down, really the kind of real estate business it was. And some of the owners had been out of Chicago, and sort of ownership was changing, and family members were not as enthused about it being from afar. And the Super Bowl was coming. And so, the word went out, Gary, much like the Stutz, that, who can help with this pretty unique property that had to be appreciated, probably not completely for its profitability standpoint, but from, a couple other points of view. And I bought it.
Yeah.
I bought it. We had it. I bought it in 2011. Super Bowl was coming in 2012. And that was a pretty fun, incredible year and a half going through all those motions.
Yeah, absolutely. And now let's keep it on the real estate and kind of wrap up the real estate piece here. You're developing some properties, right? Redeveloping some properties, primarily in Carmel. Talk about those acquisitions. What you're doing in Carmel.
Well, again, thanks, and I hope your listeners appreciate it. And again, sort of when we talked about the spirit, these selling both of these properties, but of course with the Stutz and getting involved in 1031 exchanges and all the sort of capital gains issues, it was very, very interesting, somewhat challenging. And as we looked around the city, I looked around the suburbs, I'll be gosh darn if Carmel, Indiana didn't end up having 3 properties that we ended up closing on. We had looked from Greenfield to Greencastle, Greenwood, but we looked at 50 different properties that fit all in that 1031 time frame. And gosh darn, my office is now in Carmel. Part of the car collection is in Carmel. And it's very special up here, I have to say.
Yeah, growth. Give you a quick thumbnail, because Indianapolis, Indy, certainly, and downtown has changed over the years. But if you look at, in particular, Hamilton County, if you look at Carmel and Westfield and Noblesville and Fishers, it's unbelievable the dramatic change that you talk about. Carmel there, it's just changed so dramatically over the last decade.
It absolutely has. I mean, the Rich Furniture Building, where we're sitting now, I came up here about 27 years ago to buy some lamps that would coordinate with my offices down at the Stutz. And I came to this Rich building, absolutely true story. And I just thought, well, this is quite a unique little building. Fast forward, now I own it. And, it just simply played out that way. I think it surprised many. I still have several, properties in Indianapolis. I live in Indianapolis. I kept my studio in my Stutz 2 building. And the new owners of the Stutz are building a wonderful museum for all my Stutzes. And Gary, throughout that sale, it was quite interesting that it became clear that my Stutz automobiles needed to stay at the Stutz factory. We worked that out. Very pleased about that.
Yeah.
But a little shocked to be in Carmel.
Yeah.
And I say that to the mayor, and he says, "Well, why are you shocked?" Well, just because my car didn't go past 96th or 106th Street for many, many years.
Yeah.
It is quite special being up.
Yeah. Much more with Turner Woodard when we return, including Turner, the racer, the race car driver. We'll get in a little bit more to growing up, the younger years, and maybe what's next as well when the Business and Beyond podcast continues.
First Person Advisors is now a subsidiary of National Financial Partners, the fifth largest insurance broker and consultant in the world. Develop your total reward strategies all in one place with the combination of First Person's local expertise and NFP's global resources and integrated solutions. Learn more at firstpersonadvisors.com.
Welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. My guest this week is Indianapolis entrepreneur and eclectic guy indeed, Mr. Turner Woodard. And Turner, so much we can talk about. We covered a lot of ground in the first half of the podcast, but talk about the young years growing up, because you're an Indy native, you're an Indy guy. Talk about growing up here in Indianapolis.
Well, it was just like so many that you talk to and interview, whether they're natives or whether they come here for whatever their reasons, their businesses, easy, comfortable, enjoyable. You could go on. And I get asked all the time, as certainly as, we go through these stages, that Turner, you could live anywhere, you could live anywhere, yet you choose to live in Indiana and Indianapolis. And I say, yes, I do. Whether it's the business climate, whether it's the kindness of Hoosier hospitality, absolutely true. And we did. Our family had businesses and property in Western Kentucky in my early years. So I would go back and forth. And that's, I think, as I mentioned, where some of the joy of driving trucks and equipment came from. And but yes, grew up here, went to high school here, and then went out to Colorado to college. Before, to my parents' dismay, I dropped out to attend a motor racing school in Southern California.
Very good. So that's the motorsports connection right there. That's where it began, huh?
It is. And again, I think, you interview entrepreneurs of all types. And, if I've ever had one thing, it's been the joy of trying to pursue, my passions or pursue, my goals. And I'd applied to this motor racing school that had just cropped up from England. Because in those days, if you wanted to pursue a motorsports career, it was kind of lengthy, and you really had to sort of go through a lot of bumps and bruises. Yet with the schools that came up, you could get some real teaching and some track time that would foster and speed up that situation. Mm-hmm. And in those years, you had to be 21 years old to get a motor racing license. Mm-hmm. Now, either I think it's 16 or 15. I applied to this school, and I had gotten sort of turned down. And then about 2 months later, I got a letter that there was an opening. And by the way, Steve McQueen was going to be attending the school.
Oh, wow.
To be a guest instructor. So I then really put the pressure on, and that's how that began.
Yeah. Well, how long did the school go? What was the driving school like?
Oh, it was wonderful. It was wonderful. And, trying and texting and in those days, maybe your listeners would like, most things certainly around Indiana and the Midwest were midget racing cars or sprint cars and ovals and dirt tracks. But the advent of the rear engine racing car had come with Jim Clark and Dan Gurney. So that was my focus, was to learn the techniques and what was involved in rear engine cars. And that I did.
Yeah. Did you have a dream to race at Indy ultimately? Was that, as you look at, what you were thinking about?
Yes. I did. I did. I think, growing up around and being, enjoying motor cars and all that. Sure. I did. And I got a USAC license and was really fascinated by the sports cars. But, if you had a place that sort of, make an imprint, coming to Indy was the time and the place. Yet, as it turned out, the money just was tough to come by in those days. And we had money raised through a group of investors here in town, mostly because they knew I was, searching, I was going after my goals and my dreams. And I think they respected that. At the end, we had a car that we were purchasing from Dan Gurney, and Andy Granatelli bought the car out from us. And so I then focused on sports cars.
Yeah. Well, talk about your sports car career, because you raced a lot. Give us a kind of a thumbnail look at your racing activity, because you were really into it, right?
Well, I was probably more into it than I was talented. But I raced solidly, as my parents would say. I tried to make my living for about 10 years doing that. And, it's tough. It takes engineering, it takes business skills, sales skills. But I was able to, to craft it for about 10 years. And then my parents said I had to go get a real job.
Yeah.
And
Gotcha.
Had a child on the way, and the travel was tough. And, I was probably a B racer, but, you got to be better than that.
Yeah. Who, I sense your parents obviously were big influence. Were they the biggest influence on you? Because as I look at you and I think about all of the different things you do, it's really an interesting mix. Who's the biggest influence on you in terms of how your career has panned out?
Well, Gary, that is a wonderful question. There were 3, 4, 5 men in my life that, yes, absolutely did help and spark me, both and all from different sizes. My dad, Hal Woodard, was patent attorney here in town. So that brought a certain set of skills of being very precise and organized. My father was kind of very much a free spirit. And another man in my life was a man named Guernsey Van Riper, who was in the advertising and marketing business. And
Caldwell Van Riper, I assume, right?
Correct, Gary, correct. And Herb Levinson, these were all men that, took a liking to me and improved or encouraged me to seek my spirit. Don't deny my spirit and things that I wanted to do. And I remember that to this day. And I appreciate that in all kinds of people.
As you look and you interact with entrepreneurs, but as you see young entrepreneurs, I always find it interesting to get perspective from people who have been successful in business. What's your, you talk about seeking your passion, your dreams, those types of things. Is there a set advice that you give to young aspiring business people or entrepreneurs? What's the most important thing they should keep in mind as they're starting their careers?
Well, I know that's important to you and your show and what you do. And it is, it's damn important. And I think for me, it is that. It just is that to, what all of us are so individual and what makes you tick. And, it doesn't matter whether you're going to be a computer programmer, you're going to be an artist, or you're going to try and put all those things together. It's, I know I talk sometimes to different schools and different groups, and be yourself, find what is your joy, and by gosh, go for it.
Yeah.
And in business, certainly you have to craft that with profitability and, managing your risk but you just put all those together. If I've achieved, I've enjoyed my success, and Gary, I've enjoyed the way I've been able to do it.
Yeah. Hey, I want to ask you before we wrap up, leading light. I mean, you've done, again, so many things in the entrepreneurial space. Talk about that, because that envelops your passion for racing, but a really interesting concept, this leading light technology. I think you got a patent on it. What's it all about?
I do. Well, again, I think one of my lines in it is a simple idea for a very complicated sporting endeavor. The more I talk about it and I get the idea out there, people just, oh yeah, why didn't I think of that? Especially if you're sort of an amateur motorsports fan, but more times than not, I've heard it. My son and I engage in talking about it. That who's leading this race? When the pit stops start happening and the changes, you find yourself glued to the timing and scoring towers, sometimes more than you do to the wonderful racing action. So I just researched it and found this patent available from a man in Noblesville, Indiana, of all places. We worked out a deal where perhaps with some capital, we could move forward and try and bring the ease of following a race, quite simply, to the fan.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, Gary, that's overlooked in our sport.
Yeah.
The fans are the key, and this should make it so much more enjoyable for the fans to not have to work it. Who's leading this race, or who's in third?
Yeah, right. Well, so where is it now? I mean, are you still developing? Is it out there? Where are things?
We are in the development stages. We're going to use this summer, perhaps through the Indy Lights series and or the Kenyon Midget series. The technology is there now with these LED lights and with the ability to talk to the timing and scoring towers. We've just got to figure out a way how to accurately light the lights.
Yeah,
and
gotcha.
So we thought we'd use this summer to work through those series and see if we can. I call it perfecting the widget.
Very good, very good. So that's one thing that's going to keep you busy. What else as you look at what's next, Turner? You've got the properties you're working on there in Carmel, the Leading Light project as well. What's kind of next on the agenda for Turner Woodard?
Well, that's nice that you ask. And sort of my life plan, or some of my life plan and business plan, certainly calls for being in my studio a bit more than I've been able to. And I certainly hope to do that, and perhaps have a one-man show at one of the galleries this fall. And I don't know whether you knew, some of your listeners may, but I also was able to participate with Sarah Fisher and Andy O'Gara. And I bought their go-karting building.
That's right.
Speedway,
yeah.
As part of the 1031 project. And that's a real joy to engage with these wonderful young up-and-coming stars, not only in the motorsports field, but in the business world.
And it's amazing to me. That's a great part of what is a great story in Speedway. That, I mean, you talk about a transformation in that town. It's been neat to see.
Absolutely, Gary. Absolutely. The story might not have been told 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Ron Fisher and many, many of the city council there in Speedway. Again, it's just a wonderful rebirth.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to be a little part of that.
Yeah. Hey, before we sign off here, I do want to ask you, because I didn't get into it. You mentioned being in the studio. You are an accomplished artist. So you want to spend more time and produce a little more art, right?
Well, I do. It is wonderful joy for me. And Gary, I'm not sure if I'm an artist. I'm a painter. I'm not sure about the artist part, but I'll let others decide that. But yes, I have been painting and trying to nurture that side of me ever since I would sneak out of Latin class but it's kind of a hit and miss project. So as we push to sort of get a collection of my work and get them all in one spot, that's going to take that'll take some doing, but I'm up for it.
That's good. We'll look forward to seeing that as well. Turner Woodard, it has been a real joy, as always, to catch up with you. Entrepreneur, investor, car collector, artist, you can go on down the list, a real driver here in Indianapolis. Thanks for all you do for Indianapolis and for Indiana as well. And again, thanks for being on the podcast.
You're welcome, Gary. You're very welcome. Always a joy to visit, and I appreciate it.
All right. And thank you for joining us on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast. It is a weekly conversation with achievers in business, sports, entertainment, and beyond. And you can catch all of our previous episodes as well as Indiana Business News 24/7. All you have to do is go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com. I'm Gary Dick. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.